Now, across the week, I've brought you examples of the health fascism that surrounds COVID-19, particularly the next phase we can expect with talk of vaccine passports. Again, I'm very much pro-vaccines, but I'm not pro-vaccine passports. Two very different arguments there. Because it should always be a choice. It should always be a choice. Vaccines are lifesavers, but using passports to create a category of good people and bad people is going to create a divided society. We need everyone to be able to get on with their lives as soon as possible. In the UK, the much-awaited Freedom Day has seen Brits regain a bit of normalcy. However, not everyone is happy. Some experts seem to expect people to be able to live with perpetual lockdown. They miss the point that while the number of infections is increasing dramatically in the UK, the number of deaths and hospitalisations are not. And one of those people to criticise the government for reopening the country and lifting all the remaining restrictions has been opposition leader Keir Starmer. But if he's to lecture the country, you'd think he'd have an impeccable record himself. Sadly, not. Starmer was one of 60,000 people, I think I've got a picture of him, at Wembley Stadium just 2 weeks ago to watch England play in the European Championships, clearly forgetting that he could have as easily self-isolated at home and watched the game there. Joining me to discuss this and more from the UK is commentator and host of Reasoned UK, Darren Grimes. Darren, rules for some but not for others. A bit of hypocrisy there from the opposition leader.
I know, hypocrisy from a senior politician, Rita. Who'd have thought it, eh? It really does beg a belief, though. When he was waxing lyrical about how terrible COVID is, how scary it is, how we should all be absolutely terrified of so-called Freedom Day, which I would argue actually is nothing of the sort. And yet he was with 60,000 people, very close quarters with them all, cheek by jowl almost, to celebrate England's success. Yeah, exactly. Totally. And so I sort of go back to this point of, we are having this discussion. I'm having this discussion on Australian telly, but you'll seldom ever hear it on the BBC. You'll seldom ever be able to have a discussion about this sort of thing in what's supposed to be a country that champions free speech. And now, Rita, I don't know if you remember, but last year there was a really prominent court case in this country on free speech. And one of our most senior judges said that our country's never had a Cheka, a Stasi, or indeed a Gestapo, thanks be to God. But I'm afraid to say that, Rita, with this sort of lockdown, as you just described it, this sort of, it's like this fetish of fascism almost, where we just long to be locked down. We long for politicians to tell us what to do. We long for hypocrites like Sir Keir Starmer to not champion opposition politics, but instead to champion saying, well, we should lock down sooner and faster and harder. And all of this COVID passport nonsense as well. It's a really illiberal direction that we're heading in, despite the fact that we are one of the most vaccinated countries in the world. It's mental, Rita.
Well, it is a little bit mental, and I've got to say, Boris Johnson, I never know which Boris we're going to see. He seems to do 180 turns on a very regular basis. Initially, he said no to vaccine passports, but he's come out this week and said, no, you're going to have a vaccine passport. If you want to enter a nightclub or other crowded venues, you need to have a passport to gain access. Now, how is that debate going in the UK? Are you going to end up with some sort of a vaccination passport where certain people have rights and other people don't?
Yeah, well, they're threatening it in a sort of move to try and get people my age to go get the vaccine. As it happens, Rita, I have had the vaccine, but I tell you what, if I hadn't, I reckon this move in trying to coerce people through the threatening vaccination passports, through threatening people, by the way, you might even need to show your papers to get into a pub. Boris Johnson didn't rule that out. And this is a man who said, were we to introduce ID cards in this country, he would eat it up and sprinkle it on his breakfast. I mean, and now he seems to have adopted this lockdown fascism with gusto. And it beggars belief for me. Were I not, as I say, were I not to have been vaccinated, that would get my back up, Rita. The idea that a country like the UK would ask for passports to get into a nightclub or a pub is utter farce. It basically, I thought we were encroaching on new territory in adopting China's lockdown strategy. Never mind adopting the sort of vaccination passports that we see in some dodgy authoritarian states. And I reckon, importantly, you mentioned Boris Johnson there. Politicians, as you well know, you document this often, politicians are famous for U-turns. But I'm afraid here in the UK, our government needs to remember that after too many U-turns, you quickly find that your government ends up in the U-bend. And that's what's at risk, I think.
I tell you, Boris does so many U-turns that the man must be dizzy. He needs to just sit down and
he's like a shopping trolley.
What he believes in. Now let's talk about our favourite royal. Well, he's my favourite royal. I don't know if he's yours. Prince George. It's his 8th birthday today, and I've been told it's your birthday too, so happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk a little bit about the royals. The British public, there are calls now with this new memoir Harry's going to be writing, another tell-all, that maybe these two should have all their royal titles, whatever's left, stripped off them. What do you think of that? And what is the public mood towards Harry and Meghan at the moment?
So there was a Daily Mail headline, and it read something like, Prince Harry says he doesn't need permission from the royal family to release this, $20 million memoir. Might even been £20 million memoir. And I just looked at that, and I think the response by the British people is very much, well, Her Majesty the Queen doesn't need permission from this petulant prat to strip them of their royal titles, right? I mean, this is supposed to be a stunning and brave move by much of the American press are reporting it this way, by a prince who said he left the royal family, the royal household, to pursue a humble and sort of deeply private life for him and his family. I mean, at this point, Rita, you've really got to ask the question. The only person that is intruding in this person's private life is himself. I mean, what next? Hazard and Meg on wife swap? Big Brother? I'm a celebrity, get me out of here? Can they sink any lower in this so-called quest for privacy? It's cartoon, an interview with Oprah, a Netflix deal, a Spotify deal, an intimate memoir. When will Prince Harry end the intrusion into his private life? That's what I want to know. And I think that's the mood of the British public too, Rita.
Oh, I'm with you there. I think the only thing left for them to do now that the Kardashians have wrapped up their reality show is to have a reality program. Just let the cameras into every room in the house and keeping up with Harry and Meg's. We can watch that if we're interested. Just lastly, very quickly, I've seen again J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, being targeted for her views. She was threatened with a pipe bomb this week on social media, more threats of violence against her. Tell me about this hate that she cops and what is her offence? She is continually accused of being a transphobe, but what has she actually said that is transphobic?
J.K. Rowling wrote a really, I think, beautiful essay, and beautiful because I found it very moving, and it hit a nerve with me because she was calling for, as someone who in the past has been in a relationship in which she suffered domestic violence. Now, she was arguing, making the case that if sex doesn't exist, Rita, then if biological sex isn't an immutable fact, then sex-segregated spaces don't exist either. Women's refuges, which she had to turn to at one point, and she's really worried that actually if we start to go down this whackery and wokery route that denies biological reality, then women don't have safe spaces to go to. Women who are struggling and in a really horrible position, as she was at one point in her past, don't have these really vital, crucial institutions to utilise, because men who I could go in right now and say, I self-identify as Doreen, not Darren, and gain access to one of these things, that is utter farce. So she was making the case really beautifully, really personally, and for that, she has been met with some of the most vile misogyny that I've ever had the displeasure of seeing in my life, from those who claim, Rita, to be progressive, for committing the cardinal sin of saying that biological sex is an immutable fact. If you are born a man, you will live your life as a biological male. That's just the reality of it. We see this in sport. We see this now in so many ways. It's encroaching on bathrooms. It's encroaching in so many areas. We've got right now a good equality minister in this country, Liz Truss, who's saying she's rebutting this stuff. But I'm afraid that voices like J.K. Rowling, at the brunt of this, have to suffer from so-called progressives. And that, to me, Rita, is the ultimate hypocrisy of these vile hypocrites.
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you, you might not be surprised to know, but there are bookshops in Australia and New Zealand who have banned J.K. Rowling's books, have banned the Harry Potter series because of her views, which are very, very mainstream and mild in this area. Absolutely. Darren Grimes, thank you for joining us tonight.